That was quite nice, wasn't it? It is Christmas, and being Sun News, we don't run away from that. So we're going to talk about Jesus, the Shroud of Turin. Is it a genuine picture of the man whose birth we're about to celebrate, or a medieval hoax? Now, Barrie Schwortz is the founder of the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association. He is snowed in down in Colorado Springs, so he's joining us by Skype. But it's actually a not bad reception. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there at the studio, but this is a good alternative.
No, it's fine. It's what you say that matters. Now, I would love to believe the Shroud of Turin is genuine. I really would. But I can't make that leap unless and until I know. So you're the expert. Is it genuine?
Well, first of all, let me preface the answer by telling you that I'm Jewish. I'm not a Christian. I had no emotional attachment to the subject matter. For that matter, I tried to quit the scientific team I became a part of back in the late 70s. I didn't feel that it was appropriate necessarily for me to be there. However, I did stay on the team and took about 18 years after we examined it and after I held it in my hand and left my own DNA on it before the evidence finally convinced me that the Shroud of Turin is absolutely, there's only one thing it can be, and that's the cloth that wrapped Jesus. And I don't have a problem with that. I reached that without an emotional point of view, but basically from the peer-reviewed scientific evidence and the fact that I got to examine it firsthand for 5 days and nights.
No, I'll be completely candid with you. I assume by your name that you may have been of Jewish origin, but you're telling me you're not a convert. You are still Jewish. You don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah?
That's correct. I'm not a Messianic Jew.
That is remarkable.
Much to the chagrin of many of the audiences I lecture to, but look, it is what it is, and it has to come from the heart. I could easily make those claims from the lips, but it wouldn't be the truth. And my involvement with the Shroud, my reason for building Shroud.com, I felt that the media, no offense, was not really providing accurate coverage of this.
Sure.
And I felt, once the Internet was invented, that was the perfect opportunity for me to share the materials that I've collected over the last 3 decades.
Yeah. No, I mean, just sorry to interrupt, but I think it's remarkable. I mean, because you have no vested interest. In fact, you may have a vested interest in proving it to be false. But now, let's talk about the basics of this, because people might not be aware. The claim is that this is the shroud that, after the crucifixion, Jesus was wrapped in?
Correct, after he was placed in the tomb.
Right. So how did the image, this wonderful image, it's very haunting, how did this image actually force itself, replicate itself onto the shroud?
Our team of 24 or so researchers spent almost 2 years planning to go to Turin and examine the shroud to answer a single question: how is the image formed? The same question you just asked me. After all of the research and 3 years of producing the data, we could tell you what it's not a painting, not a photograph, not a scorch, not a rubbing, but we don't know a mechanism that can create an image with the same chemical and physical characteristics that we find on the Shroud of Turin.
Okay, is there any possibility, because what is being said is it's a medieval hoax. I've always found that hard to believe because medieval paintings are not as accurate and authentic as this image seems to be.
Well, any medieval artist that was going to create an image like this, first of all, had to figure out how to make an artwork without any paint, because there's not paint on the shroud. It's not a painted image. And there's peer-reviewed science that states that. The other thing is this: he would have had to have first invented the concept of photography, because the image on the shroud itself is a negative. He would then have had to have been a forensic expert to get the blood stains all in the correct place. Interestingly, the blood stains on the shroud got on the cloth before the image formed, so there's no image under the blood, which means an artist would have had to put the blood stains in the correct forensic positions first and then paint the image around it. Never mind that there's no paint. But
is there absolute proof that it existed? Because some might argue, well, it could be a modern invention. Is there absolute proof that it did exist in medieval Europe?
Oh, absolutely. There's an unbroken chain of custody of the shroud from about 1349 to the present day. There are also clues and indications of the shroud prior to that, but there are breaks in the chain of custody in the historical record of the shroud, and of course that provides skeptics with plenty of ammunition to dispute it. What people forget is that in the first century, and this, I believe, is the reason it's not mentioned in the Gospels, it's against Jewish law to have any depictions of God, just as it is today, both for Jews and Muslims. It's also against Jewish law to possess a cloth with blood stains or fluid stains from a dead body. They must go in the tomb. So the disciples couldn't come running out of the tomb saying, look what we found. They would have made it, but the next one's onto a cross.
Exactly. Now, there are also, I mean, I find this very exciting, actually. I didn't know all of this. Is it true that there's fauna and flora on the shroud that can be traced or is unique to the Middle East?
Well, there have been some pollen. There was a preliminary pollen study done back in late 70s, about the same time we were there. Unfortunately, the gentleman was not an expert pollenographer. He was an amateur, if you will. He made some claims that later on were shown not to be accurate.
Okay.
There are people who believe they see flower images on the shroud, but there's no scientific data that supports that. That's just what somebody believes they see. You know, you and I might look at a cloud and you might see one thing and I might see another.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's what's there.
Okay. Now, so we establish it did exist as early as the 14th century. It's not paint. It's not modern. So it's before the 14th century. You're convinced it goes back to 2,000 years ago. How then did it happen? How did this negative photographic image appear on a shroud? You can wrap someone in a shroud after their death. No such image will ever appear.
Well, and of course, we really don't know that for a fact because here's the problem. Typically, a burial shroud around the body goes into a grave. The body decays. The cloth, which is also organic, decays along with it. So we don't have any intact burial shrouds of anyone else. And the thing that's interesting about this cloth is it was separated from the body sometime after death, but before the body began to liquefy and decay. Now, as far as how far back we can go, there's a manuscript, an illuminated manuscript from Hungary called the Prey manuscript from 1191, and it depicts the herringbone weave of the shroud, the man nude, which Jesus was never depicted nude in Christian art, always with a modesty cloth, but he's nude on the shroud. Nude in this Prey manuscript illustration, not just the herringbone weave, there's a set of L-shaped burn holes that are on the shroud predating the fire that caused most of the damage. And this artist included one of those L-shaped burn hole sets because they would have been the darkest and most obvious thing on the cloth when he looked at it at that time. So we actually have pretty strong historical evidence taking it at least back to 1190, 1191.
Okay. Now, I assume, well, I've read that the Christian explanation, well, let me qualify that, because I don't think that the Roman Catholic Church, for example, has made an absolute pronouncement on this.
Correct.
But many Christians would say when the resurrection took place, the process, however it was achieved, supernatural, left, the body wouldn't decay because the resurrection and Jesus eventually assumed into heaven. But the shock, the profound trauma, the miracle of this occurring would have left some form of photographic image, and that's what is on the shroud. Is that the Christian explanation?
Well, I think that that's what some people accept. Obviously, when we talk about resurrection, that's a term of faith. Resurrection isn't a scientific term, and as scientists, we can't go into a laboratory and resurrect people to see what kind of images we can make.
Yes.
So the real difficulty we have is one has to reach a point with the science that science cannot yet give us a mechanism that can make an image with these properties. But as far as faith goes, there's nothing in my mind to stop someone from seeing this image and saying, well, look, this might be a product of the resurrection. That's not a scientific statement, but a statement of faith, and I don't have a problem making that distinction, but at the same time accepting that that's what my Christian brothers and sisters believe.
Okay, just very briefly, we're out of time, unfortunately. Just very briefly, is there any other viable, plausible explanation?
Well, from a scientific point of view, there are several theories about image formation that are yet to be tested. Until those are thoroughly tested, we can't exclude them as possibilities. But, you know, at this time of year, I'm glad that the shroud is getting some media attention that at least is in a positive light. Okay,
and if it wasn't the result of the resurrection, do you think it is actually an image of Jesus?
I do. I think that it's the only man in history that possibly could have formed this image.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Sir, thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you as well.